Well, hey there, guys. I'm Axel the Beast, and this is not the Curiosity Shop Zelda Dungeon video mailbag, and I'm not going to answer your Zelda questions. I'm here to talk to you about Zelda Wii, and more specifically, what I think it should be. Not necessarily what I think is definitely going to happen, and I'm not going to talk about things that we've had confirmed, but just, things I think it should be, what I want it to be. What I think would improve the game. First off, I want to talk about the story. I think the story in Zelda Wii will and should be a bit more of a personal thing. Kind of like Majora's Mask. It was still epic, but it had this more personal feel to it. Really put you in the shoes, in Link's shoes, You were really exploring the world from a personal, more humble perspective. The epic storyline was there, but it was done in a way more like that. I'd like to see this with Zelda Wii. It adds some more variety, and I'd like to see it again. I think this is really likely to happen, too. For some reason I have a feeling it's coming. The style. I'd like more colors. I'd actually like a much more colorful, brighter style like Ocarina of Time. But I would accept a style like Twilight Princess just provided it was more colorful, a little prettier, I think it's somewhat likely that we'll see a change in style too, because they've said they haven't decided the style yet. I'd like a less gritty storyline. A gritty storyline is fine, a dark, gritty one, but I don't want to see the series turn into that. I don't mind seeing it sometimes, but it's not what I want to see the series become as a whole. Since we haven't really seen that too often, I don't think it's too likely we're going to see it again with Zelda Wii, and I'd like it that way. I think it'll be a while before we see another dark game. I'd like it to be less linear. I'd like more expansive side quests, and more of them, like Majora's Mask had. I think Zelda Wii could learn a lot from Majora's Mask, as could the series in general. An expansive world map would be nice too. Something like A Link to the Past, where we have a lot of terrain to go across, of varying types, of really diverse terrain instead of just a field. And it's not a hub either. There's a lot to find in that terrain. There's stuff to do all over the place. An exploration focus would be nice. Kind of like in the old games, everything was about mystery and discovery. It was about, exploring the land. You didn't know what was going on. You didn't know what this land was, and you were exploring it for the first time. And this whole adventure feel. The Zelda games, they're quests, they're adventures, but they don't have that journeying, adventuring feel, You can't go and just explore. I'd love it if they even could manage to pull off a wanderlust of sorts in which it's just fun to go explore and see new places on its own. If they pulled that off, aside from a main storyline, that would make an amazing game and add a lot of replay value. More variety in the areas would be nice, especially in the dungeons, because in Twilight Princess, the style kind of made it so the areas all felt very similar, even dungeons. And I'd like to see more fantastic locales, different areas that are just more out of the ordinary, very interesting. I'd like to see expansions on just the different areas and see areas that are totally different from another. It gives you a real reason to play through the game and see everything there is to see, and it would really add to the exploration that I mentioned just before. Bigger cities would be nice, and enriched lore, so there's a lot more to learn about the land, even if it never directly affects the gameplay. You could maybe even hear about other lands. It would add a lot of depth. And NPC interaction and involvement would be great, like Majora's Mask. That's one of the reasons I love that game so much. The NPCs, they were full characters, really. A timeline restart is something I would personally like to see. Or perhaps not necessarily a restart, but more of a standalone game that doesn't rely on the timeline. Timelines are fun, but in a way it sort of bogs down the experience. You're always thinking, well, what does this mean? Where does this connect? Instead of enjoying the story on its own. I can understand it with the more epic titles, but if this game is to be more personal, like I suspect it will be, like Majora's Mask was, it'll kind of be more like the timeline just doesn't matter as much, and I'd kind of like that. I'd like something a little more on its own, like the Final Fantasy games. And I'd like it if the soundtrack were to take a little more after Wind Waker and Majora's Mask than Twilight Princess. Twilight Princess had great music. I've actually complained about the soundtrack before, and I was foolish. The soundtrack is amazing in Twilight Princess. But at the same time, I feel Wind Waker had some more beauty and a little more of an upbeat, beautiful sound to it. whereas Majora's Mask had its creepy songs and it had this air of mystery. Combining those two together and skillfully knowing when to do one or the other, I think that would make a very intriguing soundtrack, and I believe some of the best songs in the series, I know some of my favorites at least, come from those two games. Ocarina of Time had good music too, so maybe borrow from there as well. Now onto more like the gameplay stuff. The difficulty, as I've mentioned before, I want it harder. I'm a hardcore gamer, so I can understand that I want it harder than most people do. I understand people want an easier game, and it needs to be accessible for, more casual gamers. So I would like either one of two compromises. Either they have a second quest, which is harder than the first, whereas the first is quite easy and almost anyone could get through it, and the second has harder enemies, remix dungeons, etc., and is just really challenging. Or they had add a built-in help feature. Now people complain about this, saying it'll ruin games, or people will just look up the guides. But that's just not true. I mean, if you're a hardcore gamer, you're not going to look up a guide, you're going to play through on your own. And I think that would just allow it to be accessible for both kinds of gamers. Either of these two would work. Technically the guide might be a little more effective, but the second quest would feel more like Zelda, so in a way I prefer that. I think it's kind of likely that they'll do this with the difficulty, but maybe I'm just being a little hopeful. I think it'd be very smart, though. There needs to be a learning curve. In Twilight Princess, things weren't really any harder later in the game than they were in the beginning. Even if the game is going to be casual and easy, there needs to be a learning curve. It can't be the same at fighting Ganondorf as it was fighting the first Bokoblin in the woods. It can't. That just doesn't make sense. I'd like the enemies to be more complex and have more detailed combat, where the enemies have all kinds of tricks and surprises, and you could fight an old enemy and it's just still not. It's not like it's a pathetic enemy late in the game. There's still some challenge to it. And to go with this complexity of the enemies, I'd like to have a journal. I love games where you have a journal that you can read up on, like, all the story you've gone through, little facts. This could enhance the lore aspect that I mentioned earlier. And also you could have a diary with the enemies. In Twilight Princess, you never heard the enemies' names in the game, and you rarely heard it in Wind Waker unless you collect the figurines. I'd like to see a diary, perhaps that fills up as you have your partner or whatever tell you about the enemy. And then you can learn about the enemy and learn strategies to defeat them, which would go along with the complex enemies. This is something they've talked about, so it's almost definite, and I'm not sure if it's something I prefer too much, but it could add to the game. I'd like, have the gameplay a little simpler, maybe less items and less complexity, but focus on the gameplay, make the gameplay really deep and intriguing. That could really add to the series. I mean, I like some of the complexity, but, there could be something to be had there, so I'm willing to try it out. I think the series should make a shift to on-foot travel, so it can experiment more with the beautiful terrain. I suppose having the horse could enhance it if you're wandering and exploring, but I still think we should have more on-foot travel like we did in the good old days, and just have really amazing environments to traverse. Maybe even grappling hooks and ropes to climb cliffs. I talked to a friend recently about having platforming. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but it might be worth trying out. Maybe more detailed climbing, like Shadow of the Colossus or something. I don't know. And just have warping if you need to travel fast. I think this is likely, because somehow I don't think the Wii Motion Plus is going to go well with the horsing. Horsing. That's not a verb. But I don't know. We'll have to see. And I'd like the shops to be more important. There was an article about this on Zelda Dungeon recently, but I'd like there to be more usage of the shops and the money not just sitting in your wallet all the time. And I would like to have a treasure hunting aspect. Twilight Princess had this a little bit. If you did manage to find a way to spend your money in Twilight Princess, like the donations for like the Malamart, you would find yourself hunting for chests in dungeons, and I thought this was brilliant. If they could expand this with like loot and spoils, that would be amazing. Speaking of which, I'd like the spoils system from Wind Waker to return in force. I'd like to see all kinds of spoils with all kinds of purposes, or just being collectibles for money, and all kinds of items to get from enemies. I'd like it really expanded, and like maybe the treasures from like Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Traps, and just mesh it all together and have all these odd little items to collect. And then we can have, I'd like an equipment system like an Ocarina of Time, where you have all these different equipment, but I'd like them to expand it so it's like, you have all these different kinds of boots that do have all kinds of movement abilities. You have all these kinds of tunics that, more like Twilight Princess or Majora's Mask, they give you different abilities, allow you to traverse the terrain differently. I'd like, them to have different weapons. That's another thing. I'd like the Wind Waker weapon system to return in force, with more weapons to use of all different kinds, spears, axes, and the like. I mean, there's just so much to be had there. It's kind of like an RPG thing, but it avoids going all Final Fantasy and instead having a Zelda-like feel on the RPG stuff. I think it would really add to the gameplay, the loot and the equipment and the weapons. It would really diversify the gameplay and allow a wealth of side quests. I don't know how likely this is, but I'd really love to see it, and it would be really smart. I would love it if, I think the weapon thing at least is almost definite. And I'd like collectibles of different varieties, like the, I guess this is more of the same, but like the Oracle Games rings. You had all these different items that you could collect. They were very collectible, hard to get them all, and they gave you all kinds of weird little abilities. They could really expand the gameplay like this. This is what I'd like to see the game be. I don't think we'll see all of this, but I have a feeling we're going to get an improvement in Zelda Wii from some shortcomings we've had in the past. Be sure to tell me what you guys think in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time.